Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Magdalen College and to the first session of a conference entitled Religious Freedom and Equality, Emerging Conflicts in North America and Europe. I'm Tom Farr, Director of the Religious Freedom Project at Georgetown University's Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, which is co-sponsoring this conference with our partner here in Oxford, the Center for the Study of Religion and Public Life at Kellogg College. I now have the pleasure of introducing our chairman for the evening, who will introduce our featured guests. We have an Anglican bishop and a Roman Catholic bishop, which I think is a good sign of balance, although to some, I suppose, they're all kicked by the same mule, as somebody once put it to me. But I think you're going to enjoy what both of them have to offer to us tonight. I'd like to introduce our chairman, Bishop John Perry. You have a rather extensive biography, so I won't read from that, but I will mention that after 18 years of parish ministry, John Perry was consecrated Bishop of Southampton and then later became Bishop of Chelmsford until his retirement in 2003. He's been a member of the House of Lords, studied theology at the London College of Divinity, and is the author of the book Effective Christian Leadership. He tells me that he and his wife, both widowed, have a combined family of 9 married children and 25 grandchildren, which means, among other things, that he is unaffected by large gatherings of people who don't agree about everything. I would also add that he is currently the chairman of an organization that is near and dear to my heart, Christian Solidarity Worldwide. I happen to be on the board of directors in the United States. He's the chairman of the board here. And we also have the founder and CEO of Christian Solidarity Worldwide, Merv Thomas, with us tonight. So we're honored to have both of them. Bishop.
Bishop Tartaglia was born in Glasgow. He was educated, his early years were in Glasgow, later in Aberdeen. His studies took him to Rome, preparing for the Roman Catholic priesthood. And over the years there, his attachment and his love for Rome, he was telling me just now that he loves going back to Rome, where so much of his past development as a priest and with his developing academic studies, which, as you will have seen, includes a doctorate in sacred theology. Also taking up a number of responsible positions within the religious Roman Catholic educational colleges in Rome. Along the way, also a Roman Catholic priest looking after a parish in Glasgow for some 9 years. He was consecrated a bishop of Paisley in 2005, and over the years since then, he has not been slow to speak out on issues that he believes the church's voice needs to be heard. And as I was reflecting on that and reading one or two examples of where he's spoken out, I was interested to see his letter to the First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, where he was tackling particularly the consultation process on same-sex marriage, and together with that in the same letter on the Offensive Behaviour Football Act that was being discussed at the time. And of course on other issues as well. Bishop Philip has been there in the forefront of expressing the concerns of his church on the issues of the day. And so we're very glad that we have amongst us now Bishop Philip to address us on the theme that he has chosen, which he titles this, Religious Freedom, an Unexpected Issue for Our Times. Bishop, we look forward with great expectation to your address to us.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to say just how completely honoured I am to be here this afternoon to deliver this address and to be associated with such great institutions as Georgetown University and here the colleges of Oxford University, and to be speaking in Magdalen College this evening. I want to thank Tom Farr for inviting me and encouraging me to address you this afternoon, and also Bishop Perry for his very warm and genial introduction. First of all, before I start, I want to just tell you a little story, which may sort of set the tone a little bit. A few weeks ago, there was a Newsnight program dedicated to same-sex marriage. And I didn't see it, but my youngest priest in the diocese saw the program, and I met him a day or two later, and he said to me, I found that program scary. He said, I was afraid after it. And I said, well, I'd heard about it myself, but he said it wasn't so much the fact that the panel completely gutted Cardinal O'Brien, who had spoken out a few days before quite forcefully on the subject. And it wasn't for that reason, he said he was afraid, nor was he afraid that all the panel were in favour of same-sex marriage, and most of the studio audience. He said, what made me afraid was that the reaction of the studio audience to the question is, if same-sex marriage is legalized, do you think anyone who speaks against it should be criminalized? And they all said yes. And he absolutely, I think that blew him away. So I think that, we can intellectualize these things a lot and consider them in a very scholarly fashion. But I think, too, we have to realize the real social impact of what is going on just now. I think we're in a very particular cultural moment, and it's one that, is going to cause, as it develops, I think, is going to present itself in certain ways which we have to deal with. But when I was consecrated a bishop in November 2005, I wasn't fretting about religious freedom in Scotland or in the United Kingdom, yet after only 6 years in office as a bishop, I think I can say that the question of religious freedom is now, or the fear of the loss of religious freedom is now perhaps the most serious threat which the Catholic Church, I speak especially for the Catholic Church, but also for all people of faith in this country are facing. And I think the way this unfolds will determine how the Catholic Church will present itself to society for the foreseeable future. Will society continue to afford the Catholic Church and other religious bodies and groups the oxygen and the vital space to be themselves and to express themselves in the public square? Or will my church be forced to conform to a publicly acceptable form of religiosity, a kind of patriotic church, if you like? Or worse, will we be driven to the margins of society and perhaps denied a legal right to carry out our mission and to express our faith in public? So these questions sound, or those scenarios sound dramatic, but I don't think they're completely unrealistic. So how have we got to this point so rapidly where the question of religious freedom arises? Secondly, what is at stake, actually? And thirdly, what do we need to do to go forward in a creative manner? How has the question of religious freedom arisen? I think the question has risen in this country both stealthily and rapidly. Scholars of the history of ideas may be able to trace its remote origins in the philosophy of the 19th century, maybe the 18th century, but I confess that in 2005, when I was consecrated a bishop, I didn't see a problem coming with religious freedom. But by February 2007, I was warning the people of my diocese in a pastoral letter that religious liberty was under attack. I never really thought I would ever have to make such a statement as the one with which I opened that pastoral letter. My dear people, I said, it's with growing concern that I raise with you the issue of religious freedom, of the religious freedom of the Catholic Church in the United Kingdom. What occasioned this concern was the introduction to Parliament of new regulations that aimed to outlaw discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation and in the provision of goods and services. These new regulations were based on the Equality Act of 2006. It was evident that they would force Catholic adoption agencies to place children with same-sex couples, thereby going against the teaching of the Church, or else they would fall foul of the law. As a result, some agencies complied with this legislation and renounced their Catholic character. One such was the adoption agency called St Andrew's Adoption Agency, formerly of the Archdiocese of St Andrews in Edinburgh, and it has now separated itself from the Church. Others, I know, here in England, closed down. Others, like St Margaret of Scotland, Catholic agency based in the city of Glasgow, of which I'm a trustee or a governor or whatever, has stood firm and continued to operate as a Catholic agency, facilitating adoption by a suitable husband and wife, although they're under pressure from the statutory agencies. It was then that I began to realize that the advance of the homosexual agenda, in concert with equality legislation, was beginning to have a problematic effect on the freedom of the Catholic Church to operate in the public sphere. Subsequently, the courts in England, in two significant, if not exactly landmark cases, ruled against the owners of a bed and breakfast facility who did not wish to accommodate homosexual couples under their roof, and then disallowed a Christian couple from fostering. Personally, I think that's the more clamorous one, because they could not guarantee that they would recommend homosexuality as a positive life choice for children in their care. So it was becoming clear that with the support of the courts, really, with the power of the courts and of the political establishment, that religious freedom and freedom of conscience could be set aside in the advance of, in favor of the advance of the homosexual agenda. So these conflicts are beginning to emerge, conflicts of rights between religious freedom and the right to sexual autonomy in all cases. There was also the clamorous case of the Englishman who mentioned on a social networking site, out of work, that he was not personally in favour of same-sex marriage. He was subsequently demoted in his place of employment and had his salary slashed by almost half. And that was before any consultation in England on same-sex marriage and before any law had been passed. I think that really shows up the kind of near hysterical nature of the intolerance which is currently justified in our society towards people who question the homosexual agenda from any point of view, but especially from a Christian standpoint. And all of this helps to explain why the Scottish bishops responded so emphatically at the end of last year to the Scottish Government's consultation on same-sex marriage, which was prefaced by the government's own admission that they were minded to legalise same-sex marriage. Bad enough that the government is prepared to change the nature of marriage to include what marriage had never been in any civilization or culture, namely a union of persons of the same sex, and to recast the nature of parenting in such a way that children would no longer have the natural right to have a mother and a father. But the legalization of same-sex marriage would, we thought, bring with it a lessening of religious freedom. In my pastoral letter to my own diocese, promulgated in October of last year, in defence of marriage in response to the Scottish Government consultation on same-sex marriage, I wrote as follows: the redefinition of marriage to include same-sex unions will bring with it state-sponsored discrimination and penalties in the courts and in the workplace against anyone who dares to question the rightness of same-sex marriage, thereby riding roughshod over freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of conscience. I accept that it's always risky to argue from likely consequences because consequences cannot always be foreseen exactly. But the concerns I've raised about the threat to religious freedom in the wake of the legalization of same-sex marriage are justifiable because religious freedom has already been set aside, both formally by the courts and informally by others in the promotion of the homosexual agenda. And the Scottish bishops are in no doubt that if the government legalises same-sex marriage, we will have a fight on our hands to preach and teach the true nature of marriage, both from the pulpit and in Catholic schools. And we fear that Catholic men and women will be discriminated against in the workplace and in society. So the question of how we have arrived so swiftly at the point where religious freedom is a live issue for the Catholic Church, the answer lies in the effect of the alliance of equality legislation with the furtherance of the homosexual agenda. And I think that's something we need to think about, and I'll try and come back to that in my conclusion. It's instructive to broaden our perspective here. Across the Atlantic in the USA, the question of religious freedom is becoming very public and very high profile, and for largely the same reasons as here in the United Kingdom. In the face of the intrusion of the Obama administration on the religious freedom until now enjoyed by the American Catholic community and by other stateside religious bodies and groups, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has seen fit to take the largely unprecedented step of establishing an ad hoc committee for religious liberty. The American bishops decided to set up a new committee because they thought religious freedom was endangered in America, of all places, a land of the free. And that religious liberty is under the chairmanship of Bishop William Lawry, formerly of Bridgeport, now Archbishop-elect, I think, of Baltimore. In the evidence that he gave on the 26th of October of last year before the Judiciary Committee of the United States House of Representatives Subcommittee on the Constitution, Bishop Lawry complained of infringements of religious freedom, which parallel our own recent experience in the United Kingdom in regard both to same-sex marriage and to adoption. Here's an excerpt from his testimony and a flavour of what perhaps we can expect here. At the state level, he said, the level of the states, religious liberty protections associated with the redefinition of marriage have fallen short of what is necessary. In New York, county clerks face legal action for refusing to participate in same-sex unions, and gay rights advocates boast how little religious freedom protection individuals and groups will enjoy under the new law. In Illinois, Catholic Charities, that's an organization, has been driven out of the adoption and foster care business because it recognizes the unique value of man-woman marriage for the well-being of children. And more recently, the Archbishop of Philadelphia, Charles Chaput, gets to the heart of the culture war which the Obama administration is waging on the Catholic Church in the United States when he said, at its heart is a seemingly deep distrust of the formative role religious faith has on personal and social conduct, and a deep distaste for religion's moral influence on public affairs. And if you think that culture war is too dramatic a term, let me refer you to a piece in the Telegraph online by Tim Stanley with a date of the 9th of February 2012, which had the title, Obama's War on the Catholic Church in America isn't just insensitive, it's un-American. This was because the Obama healthcare policies were, in the view of the writer, infringing freedom of conscience and freedom of religion. So both here and the United States, and indeed across the globe, it seems clear that religious freedom is the new key issue in church-state relations. This matter is well summarized by a report at the beginning of March of this year that the Vatican's representative at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, Archbishop Silvio Tomasi, speaking to the United Nations Human Rights Council, should say that, quote, rising restrictions on religion affect more than 2.2 billion people around the world, and that while virtually all nations claim to respect religious freedom, the gap is growing between widely accepted stated principles and their daily application on the ground. So that's something of the situation as I see it in terms of religious freedom. What are the issues at stake? The issues at stake are the notion of religious freedom itself, and I think the idea of the modern democratic state. First of all, the notion of religious freedom. As Bishop Perry remarked, in October 2011, I took the opportunity to write directly and personally to Scotland's First Minister, Mr. Alex Salmond, about one or two government policies which impinged on the freedom and good of the Catholic community. This provoked an immediate reaction, and I was invited to urgent discussions in Edinburgh with the First Minister. One of the issues I had raised was the question of same-sex marriage. And in our conversation that day, I raised concerns about the likely impact on religious freedom of the legalization of same-sex marriage, fearing that such a step would infringe the Church's freedom to preach and teach about the nature of marriage as the union solely of a man and a woman. In his response to me, he assured me that a law introducing same-sex marriage would not restrict the freedom of Catholics to practice their faith. I'm not sure if he understood the difference between freedom of worship and freedom of religion, or if he understood it only too well and was hedging his bets. Knowing full well that once legislation permitting same-sex marriage was on the statute books, equality activists and officers would be calling for sanctions against people who publicly expressed dissent from the new orthodoxy. As I've suggested already, I was worried, especially for, not so much for myself, but for Catholic teachers who have to make their living and who would be delivering a religious education program in Catholic primary and secondary schools in Scotland, in which marriage is clearly defined as explicitly as a union between a man and a woman. It's doubtful if any government would sign up to legislation and regulations which restrict the freedom of worship. But we are already at the point where a broader and fuller notion of freedom of religion is under duress. If same-sex marriage is legalized, I have no doubt that we'll need to have some kind of plan B. And I think the plan B will be about safeguarding the freedom to dissent in public and in private, in religious worship and preaching, in the Church's public declarations, in education and in teaching, and in the upbringing of children. Given the way things are moving in the United Kingdom presently, I have no confidence that any such guarantees will be forthcoming, or if they are forthcoming, I doubt if they would hold in the present atmosphere. In December 2011, David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, gave an address here in Oxford which commemorated the King James Bible. In that address, he confirmed the place of Christianity in British history and life. I had once written to the Prime Minister in critical vein when he had favourably hypothesised the legalisation of same-sex marriage even before the same matter had been raised by the Scottish Government. That letter provoked a disapproving rebuke from one of the Prime Minister's equality guardians. Nonetheless, I thought it was only fair to write a letter approving of his Oxford comments on the essential place of Christianity in British life and culture. In that letter, I said this: I was pleased to read news reports of a speech you gave recently in Oxford, marking the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible, in which you acknowledged the fundamental contribution of Christianity to British society, called for a revival of Christian values, which surprised me more than anything else, and acknowledged the importance of the Christian faith and of other religious faiths to the majority of people in Britain today. I welcome your words at a time when many of us are concerned that freedom of religion, understood not simply as freedom to worship, but also as freedom to express and teach our faith, is in danger of being eroded in the United Kingdom by illiberal limitations being placed on what Christians can say and do. I hope that your wise words will be reflected in the decisions reached by parliaments and assemblies, by the courts, and by regulatory bodies up and down the land. As you heard in that letter, I described religious freedom as not simply as freedom of worship, but also as freedom to express and teach the faith. I'm not sure how significant it is that this time I received no reply to my letter to the Prime Minister, either from him or from one of his departments or aides. But my recent experience of dealing with government on both sides of the border tells me that while freedom of worship may not be in question, freedom of religion in its full sense is something they are not prepared explicitly and publicly to underwrite. I'll conclude this point by just briefly quoting a homily of mine from November 2011 at a parish anniversary in my diocese. I said this was an ecumenical event, and people from the other churches came to me afterwards and said how much they agreed with this particular comment. We need to be aware that we are living now in a particular and uncertain cultural moment, and I sense that religious freedom, the freedom to practice, express, and spread our faith is becoming a significant matter of concern for the future of Catholic and Christian communities here in our own country and throughout the world. Our future in this parish and elsewhere will be marked by the extent to which religious freedom continues to be recognised in our country as a primary and inalienable human right. So that's that first point at stake is the meaning of religious freedom in a fuller sense, more than just freedom to worship. The second matter at stake here, I think, is the notion of the state, of the liberal democratic state. In February of this year, the Baroness Warsi, the Conservative Party vice chairman, as a follow-up to Pope Benedict XVI's 2010 visit to Britain, led a UK ministerial delegation to the Vatican to have talks with representatives of the Holy See on matters of mutual concern. The Baroness, herself a Muslim, had been quoted in the media expressing concerns that religion in Britain was being squeezed and edged out. There were lots, you may remember, of column inches in the media on the subject. One comment which achieved prominence came from the Equality and Human Rights Commission chief, Trevor Phillips, who said that religious beliefs and rules end at the door of the temple. This appeared to apply as much to those who would introduce Sharia law in the United Kingdom as to Christians who declined to give a child for adoption to same-sex partners. It's worth noting in passing the striking incoherence between the Prime Minister's praise of Christianity and its positive role in public life, to which I referred before, and the view expressed by the Equality and Human Rights chief, Trevor Phillips, with his marked tendency towards restricting, diminishing, and even banishing religious discourse from providing any inspiration or guidance or role in the formation of public policy. How can Christianity, one wonders, have a positive role in public life, as the Prime Minister seems to wish, if it begins and ends at the door of the temple? If religious freedom is limited to the doors of the temple, effectively freedom of worship, how much different will that be from the situation which holds in somewhere like say, Saudi Arabia, where there is freedom of worship, but behind closed doors? Is that the reality which Trevor Phillips is advocating on behalf of his commission? The modern theory of religious freedom, forged by progressive Catholic thinkers around and during the Second Vatican Council, advocates the compatibility of the values of the Judeo-Christian tradition with democracy. This doctrine, while asserting the supremacy of God, has no problem giving to Caesar what is rightfully Caesar's. And there is no chance of this kind of religious freedom trying to replace the law of the land with a religious code that recognizes no difference between the secular and the sacred. The secular autonomy of the state is safe with this Christian theory of religious freedom because it works on the basis of a legitimate separation of church and state, such that the virtues which are generated by religious freedom will underpin and encourage democracy, while the democratic system will support and protect due religious freedom. So while it may seem to some superficially enlightened to hold the view expressed by Trevor Phillips that religious faith should not be allowed to enter the public square, such an approach in banishing the religious from public discourses raises huge questions about the nature of the state. In his comments, Trevor Phillips appears to endorse a notion of a state which fills all civic space and reaches out to control and regulate other institutions which are present within the state. It's a notion of the state which is with a rather limited understanding of subsidiarity. If that's big government, it's big government at its scariest. It appears to have no respect for institutions such as the family and the church, which pre-exist the state, which straddle the private-public domain, and which have their own internal constitution. This is a state that is overreaching itself and is moving towards a kind of soft totalitarianism. The combination of unlimited state and limited religious freedom adds up to big problems, as we've seen in the past and indeed in the present around the world. And it's perhaps instructive to point out that the robust assertion of religious freedom was what helped liberate Poland and other Eastern European countries from communism and put them on the road to becoming viable democracies. A state with a healthy understanding of subsidiarity will recognize and encourage free associations and institutions, especially the family, the churches, and religious groups. The state should recognize these groups as goods in themselves because they normally encourage the kind of friendship and discipline which is important for human flourishing and for the development of the virtues which are vital for a healthy democracy. A state that recognizes human associations that exist prior to the state, not just chronologically, but in terms of the
the potential?
I think
threat
I
from
think the secularist is easier to deal with. It's straight philosophy. You either get it or you don't. You either think Richard Dawkins is great or he's not. Or if you can dismantle it or accept it. Now, I think it can be dismantled, but the homosexual thing is much more emotive and has, for some reason, touched the popular imagination to a great extent. And the polling on homosexuality and gay marriage, at least superficially, looks very much in favour, although we conducted some polls ourselves and we found if you ask a different question, you get a different answer. If you ask a question like, simply, do you think gay people who love each other should get married? Hardly anybody's going to say no to that. But if you say, do you think you can maintain the traditional understanding of marriage without being unjust to homosexuals, people say yes to that. Many more people say yes to that. Also, if you say, do you think children should have, in the best scenario, a mother and a father who are married to each other? Yeah, you've got quite a big. So it really depends on the question you ask. I think that we found that anyway in Scotland. The question is very important, but nonetheless, the homosexual thing is very, very strong, even among young people, and who have immediately caught on to they mustn't be homophobic at all costs. They mustn't be homophobic. So in some ways, it's cool. And it's been cool or presented as cool. Many groups of girls have a homosexual male associated with them. There's been quite an alliance there between young women and gay men, which has also been very interesting. But I don't know the answer to that. But I think it's easier to deal with the secular thing than it is to do, because the homosexual thing is so multi-layered. Whereas the secularist thing, it's a straight theology or philosophy. I think, anyway, a straight theology or philosophy battle in the end. So I don't know if that answers your question. But thanks.
Think of us, Dawn.
I tried anyway. They're such good questions. Yes.
My name is Leslie Pilkington.
Leslie.
I'm a psychotherapist and a Christian counsellor, and my story has been in the newspapers recently, so I just want to speak very briefly to why I think that the homosexual agenda has become so powerful.
Okay.
Now, I do believe it's important to have rational debates like we're having today, but at the end of the day, my experience has been that the gay agenda is intimidating, bullying, and it generates fear. And we have to stand against that. We just have to stand against that with the truth. And people are afraid of bullies so that they will accept what is being said by the homosexual activists, when in fact they are actually, at the end of the day, there are a lot of lies. There was a young man recently who was very prominent in America, written a book about how good it is to be gay and getting older. But in fact, he committed suicide because he said his life was based on lies. Now, I think we have to, as Christians, address the truths in love.
You're right. Thank you for that, because if I said that, people would say, well, you would say it anyway. But if a psychotherapist can say it, I think it comes from another angle. And I think you're right. If what I've heard is true about the relationship between physical and mental health about the physical and mental health of gay men, if it's true, then society has been very quiet about it. There's recently in Scotland there was a gay Catholic MP died at the age of 44 or so, and nobody said anything. And why his body should just shut down at that age. And I mean, well, obviously he could have had, a disease that would have killed anybody. But, you seem to hear so many stories about this kind of thing. And but society won't address it. You're right, Leslie. Thank you.
Bishop, thank you for your remarks. My name is Robin Wilson, and I'm from Washington Lee University in Virginia. So we have also seen a number of rollbacks of protections, abortion conscience protections in the United States. I'd be happy to tell you a little bit about them.
Good.
But I think what we're seeing in the United States is a chipping away effect. So the difference between that and maybe the kind of implications that same-sex marriage has for religious freedom is the difference between a retail effect and a wholesale effect.
Right.
Because when you have a sea change in the law, you're going to have it precipitate across or reverberate very quickly across a number of fields. I did want to say that perhaps there's an important thing that we're missing on the marriage question, which is, at least in the United States, and I understand perhaps also here, that we have many same-sex couples who are parenting children in the United States frequently at the invitation of the state itself. And I think for some folks who believe that marriage is very important to the protection of children, if not the adults in the relationship itself, then I think they're caught on these twin horns of different commitments. If you believe in marriage as protective of the children, it gets very difficult after that change has already been recognized and cemented in society, whether that was the right choice or not, or past that, then to say, how do we lock these adults and these children out of marriage? So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, those sort of dual commitments.
Yeah. Could you I'm not sure I quite understood the question. Could you just tell me again?
Well, for me, I see marriage as, I'm sort of a marriage wonk. So I believe in marriage as protective of the adults in the marriage and of the children themselves. So if you start with that commitment, and you already have a change in society that has, for whatever reason, decided to place children in either coupled lesbian and gay couples, or people who are individually identified as lesbian or gay, but not necessarily in an active homosexual relationship, then what do you make of society's commitment to those children and the protection of them?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. These things are happening, and it does create a problem because we want to hold up marriage as the state which protects children and couples. And we've had here, one of the arguments for same-sex marriage is, well, better be in a stable union than not. But I think that, my principles would be, people would say they're presuppositions that children are going to be better with a mother and father who are married to each other. I think the statistics which are out there demonstrate that, but again, you're almost prohibited from saying it because of all kinds of pressures. But I think it's too early yet to tell just how well children will do who are placed with same-sex couples. And I suspect, in the long run, not very well. And I think it will, further damage sexual identity in the community at large, because these boys and girls just maybe won't know who they are in terms of their relationship to their parents or to those who are acting as parents. But I think that this is something that we will rue in the long run.
One other question that needs to be asked.
Well, it directly follows on Robin's point. My name is Linda McLean, and I'm from Boston University, and I teach family law. And I think what Robin is saying is that one of the things that's happening in the United States is, legislatures and courts have moved to a more functional approach to parenthood and to family definition. And in these battles over access to marriage, social science evidence plays a very important role. Now, you might find that the church's role is to say, look, even if you show me 70 studies that say this, you don't understand about gender complementarity, or you don't understand the deeper truths about marriage. But right now, part of the reason things are changing is the social science data is supporting the view that child outcomes do not hinge on the gender of the parent. People in this room may not believe that, but that's what legislatures, that's why the Department of Justice letter to Congress about DOMA, is talking about the social science evidence. And the one 30-second point, I just want to say that in terms of religious liberty, in New York, when the Marriage Equality Act was passed, religious groups were on both sides of the issue. In California, religious groups are on both sides of the issue. So I do want people to be mindful of the fact that this isn't just a secular agenda. There are religious groups with genuine, conscientious convictions that same-sex couples should be allowed to have access to civil marriage, just as in their own tradition they can have their unions blessed. So I just want to get that.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. And I can't speak for other Christian communities, but I know in the Catholic community we would have also, people who would Catholics who would support same-sex marriage, or at least not see any problem with it. But I think the role of the bishops and the role of the church is to teach the truth of Jesus Christ, and I think that's what we would try to do. But thank you. Well, it's very interesting what you're saying about the social sciences. So it's probably something we need to think about. But thank you.
As we draw this opening evening to a close, I'd make, if I may, one or two reflections, and they link very much to the last part of Bishop Philip's very fine address to us, his keynote address, where he looks ahead. And one of the points he made was the need for an increased public understanding of the importance of religious freedom. And as I was reflecting on and how true that was and how true that is, it's also important that our churches, whatever the group, whatever the denomination, whatever the tradition, are part of that increased understanding. I was conscious of that on Sunday, Easter Day, talking with two of my son-in-laws in their different churches that they come from, and talking about some of these issues that we've had opened up to us this evening. And what was clear was two things. Firstly, that there does need to be a lot of work done on understanding the true nature of religious freedom in the context of these issues today. Secondly, and this was a sobering part of our discussion, was that they felt that within their churches and other churches that they knew of, they did not understand or cope with church members with those who were of a homosexual background and attitude, and that handling that so often homosexuals do not feel accepted or listened to within the life of many of our churches. Now, that could be tested and so on, or taken up. But I think it does again come back to the importance of a conference of this nature, that in our panels and exploring and the papers we've had to read, that we're able to wrestle, as we have done this evening, with the courage in which Bishop Tartaglia has been unfolding his keynote address to us. He's, I believe, brought much for us to tackle, reflect on, and take away in the next 24 hours. He said one thing right at the end, and he said this. He said, there could well be testing ahead, and that testing, and that he particularly was thinking about those who are part of the Christian church in one way or another, can be facing fairly soon increasing testing on a number of these issues that relate to religious freedom. And he said this, and he turned it round in a positive way. Testing can be freeing and purifying. Christians must always be hopeful and ready for dialogue. Thank you, Bishop, for this evening, for setting us off in our conference in a way that we will be enormously grateful for, I'm sure, as our time together unfolds. Thank you very much indeed.